You're listening to Life in Diasporas on Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, please join us on Patreon.
Afro-brasileiro.
Afro-peruana.
Italiana.
Cameronaise.
Negra.
Afro-boliviano.
American. São Tomés.
Moçambicano.
Afro-colombiano.
Ivoirien.
Sénégalaise.
Cambodgian.
Kenyan.
Yoruba.
Welcome to Life in Diasporas, a podcast dedicated to conversations that attempt to decipher, analyze, and understand what it means to be a member of the African diaspora in a European country in the 21st century. I'm Zaya, an international relations student studying abroad and interning at Little Africa, a company dedicated to promoting African cultures in Paris and beyond through publishing art, stories, and tourism. Today I'll be joined by Thato, a Botswanan and Dutch global nomad and Black female entrepreneur, the founder of Curated Culture online magazine. Hi Thato, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And thank you for agreeing to be part of the Life in Diaspora series. We're so excited to have you. And just to kickstart, can you talk to me a little bit about yourself, where you are?
So basically, again, my name is Thato. I'm 21 years old. I'm living in Den Haag or The Hague, the Netherlands. And so I've been in the Netherlands for 3 years, where I lived in Rotterdam. But basically, I was born in Botswana and I moved to Zimbabwe, then Ghana, then Zambia, then Tanzania. And that's where I graduated. So I've lived in 5 African countries. And now I'm in the Netherlands. I'm studying international studies with specialization in Africa. And so I'm doing a language alongside that, and I'm learning Kiswahili right now, which is great. And so that's a little bit about me right now.
Very, very cool. So you've been a little bit everywhere, you would like to say. So that's really what we want to tie into life in diaspora. So how would you identify yourself if I were to say, where are you from?
That's a really tricky question, obviously, because my mom's from Botswana and my dad's from the Netherlands, but I never really grew up in either of those two countries. And we all spoke English in the household, so I don't even speak Setswana. So for me, it's always been third culture kid from the get-go, it's the same thing that you were talking about earlier about that internal clock, every 3 years, getting ready to up and go and make new friends, which is probably what I'm really most used to. So I feel like third culture kid is what describes me best. And it's not the greatest label because it doesn't really adhere to any sort of root or any sense of home. But honestly, I do consider myself an African, which is tricky because when people ask, I don't like to say that because it perpetuates the idea that people should just say Africa and African rather than specify. So I always have to say I'm from Botswana and the Netherlands, but I grew up in these 5 countries and I consider myself African just because probably know a lot more about Tanzania than I do about Botswana and about Zambia than I did Ghana. So it's very hard for me to place myself in that definition, but definitely not Dutch, definitely not in Botswana in certain ways, although I think that culture stayed along with me much more since my dad did a lot of work there. And I think he himself as a Dutch person relates much more to African experience as he was raised in Cameroon and Kenya himself. So it's just that general sense of third culture African kids.
A blessing and a curse, but something we're always
Amen.
So that sense of third culture kid, you're in The Hague right now. How do you feel like other people in your community perceive you?
Wow, constantly thinking about this. Different groups perceive me differently. So I'm constantly alternating between who I think I should be and who I think I am in certain situations. So it's interesting because even amongst other Africans that I meet, just being African there's so much diversity and just difference in experience. So that's a really good question because I definitely switch up personalities around people a lot to make myself understood because certain mannerisms or lingo or ways of saying things or ways of connecting with people are just so inappropriate in certain settings. So for example, when I'm around Dutch people, a lot more of that Dutch culture comes forward in me as much that I want to relate to, which means it's limited because I don't find myself a fully expressed Dutch person in the ways that other Dutch people are. Mm-hmm. So there's always usually a cap to that. And then if I meet with other third culture kids, honestly, I feel like that's where I find it easier to relate to people. So that's just because I think there's a general sense of knowing that same feeling of not knowing what home is like, but also just being used to being different than people. So that usually is a stronger connection for me than a lot of the times when I do meet with Africans, because that's such a big group in of itself. There's a lot of Africans that grew up in the Netherlands and even their parents. So there's a huge gap there. They know more Dutch than me. They're more assimilated to the culture here than I would be, versus versus Africans who've only grown up in their one African country and don't know much about moving around and being in other international settings. Maybe it's their first time. So honestly, there's not ever a single group that I feel like I'm perceived wholly. It tends to be third culture African kids, which is rare to find.
Speak to me a little bit about like the Black community or the African community where you are. How accessible is it? How involved are you in it? How are you, I guess, perceived by them, right? Because you said you're perceived differently depending on which community you're with that day. So talk to me a little bit about the Black community in The Hague or in the Netherlands, because I know you kind of moved around the Netherlands a little bit.
Sure. So I'm definitely not an expert on information just because of that language barrier between me and Dutch Africans who have they've just grown up here their whole life. So I'm unable to really to speak on the whole experience. But I found more community online, especially just because of the pandemic. I haven't had too much of an opportunity to actually be amongst people and see what it's really like and be a part of certain associations, communities, groups. But some of my favorite things that are in person are like Mama Africa, for example. But this is more a social situation because they host African parties with Afrobeats music, which is a must for me. Like, I just love it. Like, it feels like home. It's great music. And then there's just so many other Africans that attend. And so it's a safe space automatically. And so you step into that and you can just have fun. It's already catered to you. You don't have to think about it. And it's not weird if you're wearing your African print outfit because everyone else is, or if they're not, it's great. It's not like, like, oh, why should I dress like that? So that's kind of like my favorite setting to be, because I'm also not forced to, if I make friends, I make friends. I'm not like being perceived, I'm just there for fun. And then otherwise, though, I see a lot of like African/Black Dutch people that hang out together a lot. Like, it tends to be usually just that singular groups like that I've seen around. But if I walk by, I usually hear Dutch. So I really don't know too much about what that's like. And I can imagine that it's not that inclusive in the Netherlands, like a lot of social gatherings and a lot of spaces, which is also why I don't really see many Black people out. And if I do, it's usually in certain neighborhoods or at these Mama Africa events. Like, I'll even be like, where do you live then? Like, how come I'm only seeing you here tonight? Like, what school do you go to? Like, where do you work? Because I think just in my workplaces at school, I just don't come across that many Africans or Black people. So yeah, so it's mostly online platforms. So for example, there's like the OMEC. I don't know if you've heard about them. So it's like a talent lab/platform community where it's like based in the Netherlands, where people can come together and creatives can meet up, and they give like different sessions on how to get internships and helping companies find diverse employees and kind of bridging the gap between that. And so I find that platform is super great because they do work related, career related, but they also allow for storytelling. Yeah. And so they have sessions where people can come together and pass down African stories that they grew up with. And so that's also really great. But again, with it being online, there's that distance. And if you're lucky, you find people in your area who want to work with you or want to meet up, and which obviously with COVID is limited. So it's hard to see the full effect of some of these like associations. And again, online Instagram, We Buy Black. So other than products and services, they also have people tag like tattoo artists, things to do, all sorts of books and movies. And so I find a lot of information through that as to what I can find in the Netherlands, activities, restaurants that I know are going to be African or Black owned. So really, I feel like right now there's a lot more information being made available, but I cannot say that I have found like a really strong, united, like African community that's a consistent, that's been there over time, that's, that everyone knows about, unless maybe it's just me, I don't know. But yeah, that's what I've seen. I mean, there's African student associations at the universities. I didn't join one in my first year when I first moved. I don't know. I was not really like taught to do that, told to do that. I didn't really know much information. I didn't know how important it could be. And then now I'm in this new university and they have one, but it's young. And so it's not yet rolling on its feet. It's not yet up and running. And so we haven't had any events since the first event. And so I can't say anything about that just yet. So I feel like maybe it's still building because I don't think there have been many safe spaces for Dutch Africans or Black Dutch people in the Netherlands. I think it's just been assimilate, like simply that, or rely on your own family communities or your neighborhood friends, which obviously I just moved here. I would not be in that community right away.
I mean, with you on board with the African Student Union, I know it's going places, but no, definitely, kind of trying to find your sense of community in a place where you're by blood, I'm from here, on paper, I'm from here, but in my heart and in my lived experience, am I really from here? So yeah, that was a great way to put like community and, even like my own experiences and other people that grew up like us, kind of a little bit of everywhere. Like it's something that we've just always faced that barrier. When we get to home on paper, we're here for school, we're home, but is it really home? I want to pick at that point because when you were talking about like Mama Africa events, you were just like, you're shining. You're like, that's where I feel my best. That's where I don't need to explain, translate what I didn't go to school on an elephant, none of that. But you
exactly
at home. And those were your words. You said, I feel at home. So what is home for you?
Home is honestly a safe space in which you can be understood through like easier communication. So you have people who are willing to listen and also ask questions because it's hard to have to constantly correct people. Whereas I found even with other people who are not African, who are just interested in understanding and learning without asking, problematic questions. Like I find a sense of home in that because then later I'll make a joke or reference something related to that topic and they'll be like, I get you. And so it can even be in those interactions where people will know about African references just because they ask me like, yo, what's your favorite movie? Or like, did you guys have many movies like growing up like that? Or what African shows should I watch? And yeah, there's a bit of that, like, I'm not here to educate you, but once people start to like tap into that, they can be a sense of home. And so usually that's automatic with other Africans or other third culture kids in that way. So really it's about safe space where people are genuinely interested to learn about you and you learn about them and then create that space where you can then just be, yeah, home is a space where people are really not gonna judge you or impose any sort of like way of living or standard of being, because after the questions, it's not automatic that people then come together or agree on how things should be as well because of cultural barriers. And so I think a safe space is kind of where conversations can be had about that and shared and understood from different perspectives. But obviously that's a much more like diplomatic response to the question. But personally, to me, home is just a place where I can just be myself and I don't feel bad about it, or I know that the people understand my intentions and what that means. Like if it's a joke, if it's a cultural reference, and I don't have to overthink everything. So yeah, that's home to me.
If you're enjoying this episode of Life in Diasporas, check out our sister podcast, Romancing in Paris, as host Lily Hayes takes you arrondissement by arrondissement, discovering the most romantic parts of our city. Life in Diaspora will be right back after a short word from our sponsors. And now, back to Life in Diaspora.
Now, I do just want to tap into something because I know you're more than just a student in The Hague. You kind of had a huge other side of Thato, and I wanted to ask you to share a little bit about your life as a young Black African creative living in the diaspora.
Sure. So Curated Culture is my little baby right now. I don't even know how to describe Curated Culture because it's relatively new. So I started it around like June, July of 2020. And so obviously this was around the time of the protests for the death of George Floyd. And there was just like a massive uproar online. And I just felt like obviously for a lot of Black people, this is not a new story. Yes, it picked up and got a lot of media attention, but it's not a new story. And I just felt like I got upset and really angry, and I was harboring a lot of those feelings, and like, why does it have to be like this? And then it started to tap into my experience and all my negative experiences in the Netherlands. And then it started to become less hopeful and just more angry. And I thought, like, there's so many people who are having this experience, and it could be worse for them emotionally, mentally, and also just physically. And I was just like wondering, like, why do we not have enough spaces where we can weave into the important messages, but also positivity and hope in a non like toxic positivity kind of way. And then I was just thinking, like, I really am interested in the creative and cultural field, and I'm never hearing about the African side of that. I'm never like being represented in that way, like in TV shows and high fashion, high art, and also lowbrow. Like, it's just not really like an inclusive space. And I just thought, like, I've seen so much African arts and culture because I've been able to grow up in the continent and see and do things. And so it'd be really cool to weave together other people who are creatives, artists, who are thinking about these things, to come together and share their artwork, their opinions, their essays, their feelings in a space where they can share that with other people who may be in similar age group, similar circumstance, and not feel so lonely, especially in the pandemic, but also to be inspired and to think about the positive and think about the possibilities and to see it expressed. Like, I mean, on the cover, you know, we have Jan Lapnet from Cameroon. And so just to see maybe somebody from your own country on the cover of a digital magazine, like, that's something to feel connected to and proud of, and to show that representation. So so we just basically collected artwork and different pieces from people, including you, as you know. And so put that all together, and everyone got to see, read, and interact with other people, just because they were like, didn't know that somebody else was doing a project like that, for example, or got to let somebody know that their art was great. And that was probably the first time they got to display their art, because obviously on that amateur level, like, there's not that many like platforms and spaces to be seen. So I think on a personal level, it was also really like nice. Outside of representation, people got to come together for that. And I really enjoyed it because I was scared. I didn't know people would really like submit, but it was really just born out of that frustration of like, I want to do something, anything that's not just expressing my anger, but joy. And so I was really happy to get so many different like submissions from friends of friends of friends, and from strangers, and from close friends too. And it was just amazing, like, to see it all together. It's like there's so much more hope than you think, because when you're on your own, you just think nothing good is going to happen. And so, yeah. And then we also run an Instagram page. By we, I mean Celine, Wanjiru Ernest, and myself. And yeah, on the Instagram, we included like informational bits and pieces of historical information, as well as contemporary activists and content creators. So it really ranges from political issues all the way to creativity and artistic expression. And we also had some people join us in our team for a bit. We had Lesedi, Serema, we had Brandy, Vervai, we had Lizwa, Sally. And so, yeah, we were lucky to work with other people, because Lizwa was in Kenya, Lesedi was in Namibia and Botswana, Brandy was also in the Netherlands, and Celine was in Kenya. So it was nice to see that there is a need for that space, even internationally. Yeah.
No, and I know I've seen the final product. There are 2 issues out right now, summer and winter, and both of them have been beautiful. So proud of you guys, and amazed by like how you came up with that, and like the potential behind it. And we saw it firsthand when you dropped that first issue, just how many people came together to create it, to appreciate it, to share it, you know. So proud of you guys. It was an amazing idea, and I cannot wait to see how your baby grows.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I guess to wrap things up, how do you see the future of the diaspora in Europe? If you could say, this is the direction I want the future of us to go in, what would it be?
It's kind of crazy because it's somewhat happening. I feel like, given Beyonce's Black is King and Wizkid's Made in Lagos album that just really like also went global, and then Burna Boy's album that went global, we're starting to see, at least in my opinion, a little bit of a Black African renaissance. And Black people are so proud to now be claiming their cultural roots and heritage, and are stepping into that. And so in a way, I'm starting to see it happen already. Obviously, there's also the US and the UK involved in all of that. So we're seeing a lot more merging between like people who've lived in the West and people who've lived in Africa kind of come together and kind of just celebrate, entertain, inspire. And so I kind of see it happening anyway, because even just like from my first year walking in the street and seeing how Black and African women and men would be dressed in the street versus like after this content started to come out, you see a lot more different like African hairstyles coming forward and different fashion, like different ways of expressing themselves stylistically. And it's really cool to see that then like now people are tapping in. And so I really don't know how that's going to transform over the next few years, because there's a lot of conversations happening. Like, I mean, Black is King has been great, but it's also been criticized by a lot of Africans. And there's still a lot of dialogue that needs to happen between diaspora that's been away from the continent for a really, really long time or has been disconnected from that information versus those that have grown up in those countries and have seen how it's been transitioned under different presidents, under different circumstances. So honestly, the future for me is kind of bridging the gap between that and finding new ways of understanding each other, because there's still misrepresentation within that community that needs to be addressed. And so that's kind of where I see it in the shorter term, more conversation, more dialogue, and yeah, just kind of getting it right, get that system running. And otherwise, I just see blossoming. I just see businesses. I see different movements, political activistic movements. And that's just what I'm excited for. And hopefully it's still going to start transitioning out of pain and into more like celebration and expression. So yeah, I don't know, just much more safe spaces for Africans and Black people to feel safe. So, and then also more understanding from allies and non-allies, hopefully transitioning into allies. Yeah, so I don't know, that could have effects that go to the political, now seeing other countries who can stick up for other communities and minorities. So I see it just affecting everything, to be honest. It's hard to isolate it to just like events and entertainment, to then like fashion and media, to then just politics. It's all like, so it's woven together so tightly that I can see it can even shape politics and vice versa. So that's what I'm looking forward to, seeing how the art changes the way, you know, political systems are being run or international relations, but then also vice versa. And so
yeah, no, beautiful. I got one thing from that. It's, you said blossoming.
Yes.
Put that all together. No, that was amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time today. I mean, we've loved having you, interviewing, speaking with you, hearing a little bit about your experiences, about your projects as a young Black entrepreneur. So proud of you. We love to see it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Life in Diasporas. Our theme music is Tinini by Kasim Bada, $1 Million Challenge. Life in Diaspora is produced as part of the Paris Underground Radio Network. For more on this show and shows like it, please visit parisundergroundradio.com.
This episode of Life in Diasporas was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more great content, please visit us on Patreon at patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio.